After a few short months and a fast-tracked production, the biggest hurdles were behind the Lost crew. But in order to make a good and successful start in the fall season, there were still many tasks ahead of them, including changing the minds of their toughest critics. Number 1 on the list of changes was the pilot episode itself, which had to be overhauled and polished for the official broadcast on TV. The required effort to transform the quickly produced original cut into the final cut was ultimately quite limited in compared to some other shows, where in some cases the whole pilot had to be reshot with a rewritten script or a new cast. Nevertheless, it took a few months until the final cut was completed. For example, they worked on a few different variants for the title sequence, like this one. In the end, they decided against it and didn't even replace the version that Abrams had rendered on his Mac during the initial sound mixing.
We did a title sequence. Brian sort of oversaw all these different title sequences, and we were trying to experiment with things, and we did all sorts of different stuff. The one that I was just thinking of with your question was it was really cool. It was all these images of sort of like a mailbox with like all this mail in it, and like a car like alone in a parking lot, and all these images that sort of imply that someone was missing and not where they should be, and it was really emotional and cool and weird. But it was so like esoteric, and it just took you out of the. It was a weird thing. It was good, and it was very exciting. We started talking about should we ever do a show where we see. And my guess is if we are lucky enough to have the show go on for a period of time. I love experimenting with stuff like that, and I think that Carlton and Damon would as well. The writers always have really cool ideas you wouldn't expect. So my guess is that would be something that we would try.
And the funny thing is about the credits, as long as JJ opened that can of worms, is after ABC spent God knows how many thousands trying different versions of the titles, we ended up going with what is the current title, which is what JJ did on his Mac one day in the editing room, if I'm not mistaken.
It was a temporary thing. I was just doing it sort of as a goof because I knew for the pilot presentation to the network we'd need something. And we just ended up using it. And I couldn't believe that we ended up.
We were Damon and JJ and Brian and I were all standing in the office and we were looking at these title sequences. None of them worked. And we said, well, let's just go with this.
One of their biggest issues, however, was the requirement by the network to split the pilot into 2 parts, which Abram and Lindelof weren't quite happy about. Instead of airing the pilot on one evening as it was once intended by Lloyd Braun, the second part was going to have to be aired the following week. The 2-hour slot of that evening was instead given to the premiere of the new season of The Bachelor. Abrams and his editor Mary Jo Markey were worried that the first part alone wouldn't introduce enough characters for audiences to get invested in, causing some not to tune in for part 2. Their disappointment also stemmed from the fact that television shows are written with all of the required commercial breaks in mind. Episodes follow the usual 5 or 6 act structure to create tension and even mini cliffhangers before commercial breaks.
Terrific.
In an effort to keep the audience from switching to another channel. While the pilot originally started out with 5 acts, it evolved into 7 acts during production when the pilot was extended to 2 hours instead of the usual 1. The entire structure of the story was then adapted to the feature length. In order to create a similar effect as originally intended, the final version of the pilot was ultimately split into 9 acts, with some rearrangements. The consequence was that they literally had to cut the pilot in half to fit the 42-minute format, with the first part now ending with the moment that Jack, Kate, and Charlie find the dead pilot hanging in the tree. While this somewhat works as a shocking ending point, it was never supposed to be a cliffhanger that made the audience wait a whole week to see what happens next. In fact, it wasn't even supposed to lead to a commercial break, but straight back to the beach, with Shannon and Claire having a conversation. Apart from that, the final cut was largely kept as it is, and only edited in a few scenes to improve some of the internal logic. This can be seen in an early moment when Jack tries to save the life of Rose. In the original cut, he notices that the airplane wing is about to crash down on Claire and Hurley, but still focuses on Rose despite this imminent danger. In the final cut, Rose is saved before Jack notices the wing. Certain scenes, however, were shortened for quite trivial reasons. Some lines of dialogue were simply redundant and didn't really fit the characters or situations. They also had to be aware of the limited runtime to make enough room for commercial breaks. Some of the lines that are missing in the final cut include Hurley's very first line,
Hey, you! Come here!
Plane crash!
Yeah, I know!
the moment in which Michael tries to speak Spanish with Walt,
Esta es libro bueno, pequeño hombre. That was kid.
and the reason why the stewardess gives Jack another bottle of vodka.
I saw you when you got up. Giving up your first class seat to that older lady?
Oh, I wasn't being sweet. She guilted me into it. She's like 600 years old and says she's never flown before. Come on.
So you think it's all an act?
I'm pretty sure.
Another factor that determined some of the cuts were the policies of the Federal Communications Commission, which determined what kind of content can be shown on broadcast television. In the case of The Lost Pilot, the scenes in which Charlie used heroin had to be trimmed slightly. Markey's editing work, however, was not yet done, as the creative team faced yet another issue, the aspect ratio. Because Abrams filmed the pilot in a 16:9 widescreen format, they also wanted it to air that way. The problem was that TVs with the classic 4:3 aspect ratio were still the norm in 2004, meaning that the pilot would not utilize the entire screen. Abrams then began to negotiate with the network so that they could broadcast it in a letterbox format, meaning they would present the complete pilot with black bars at the top and bottom. ABC, however, was adamant and demanded to air a 4:3 pan and scan version of the pilot, which meant that Markey had to cut off parts of the image in an effort to use the full screen of the TV. It would be possible to simply create a center-cropped image and cut off the left and right parts in equal measure, but this would not result in the best picture possible. She therefore went through the entire pilot again and manually selected the best parts of the image, scene by scene, shot by shot. Aside from the actual editing, the VFX also had to be completed and polished. For example, they had to add some digital camera shake, which is especially noticeable after the big explosion on the beach. Another change was the correction of the screen direction of the climbing scene. In the original cut, the group can be seen in a distance shot to be climbing from left to right, which contradicts their close-up shot where they are climbing from right to left. The distance shot was thus mirrored for the final cut to be consistent with the close-up. Completely missing elsewhere was the outside of the plane in the first flashback. When Jack looks out the window in the original cut, he just sees a white void instead of the wing, the sky, and the clouds. This was also done by Digital Dimensions, who were already responsible for the sequence in which the plane breaks apart in midair. Without a doubt, one of the funniest changes had to be with the polar bear situation. During the filming of the pilot, the bear already didn't live up to their expectations when they launched it into the air for the attacking sequence. Things got a bit worse during the summer when somebody posted a screen cap from the original cut on LostTV.com, from where it then spread to other sites like FanForum.com, where it quickly became an object of ridicule. In response, Kevin Blank, allegedly without asking anybody for permission, set out to work with John Teska of Eden FX to replace the bear with a CGI model for which he rendered a full 24 frames for a whole second of screen time. However, they just used 4 frames in the final cut. In contrast, there was a lot of work left to be done in the sound department in Room 6 of the Buena Vista Sound Services studio in Burbank. In a direct comparison, it's very noticeable that the soundscape of the island was changed quite a bit. Judging by the final cut, the island doesn't seem to offer a lot of wildlife, opposed to the original cut, where various birds and even monkeys could be heard. The most important and interesting difference between the two versions was the sound design of the monster, which had evolved quite a bit over the past few months. Abrams already spoke with Thomas DeGorder during the early days of Lost about the monster, saying that the viewer should not be able to make out what it is and have them debate whether it is organic or mechanical.
What was that?
That was weird, right?
Is that Vincent?
It's not Vincent.
Did anybody see that?
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Sound designer Paul Mennicini was responsible for the original sound, which seemed much more animalistic, especially in the sequence during the survivors' first night on the island. The network, however, was not happy with the sound of the creature and gave feedback that it sounded too much like a dinosaur and that it would have to be changed to avoid any comparison to Land of the Lost, an adventure show from 1974 in which a family falls through a time portal and is stranded in the distant past. The creative team struggled to come up with a new take and decided to bring in somebody from the outside with a fresh perspective. This turned out to be Jack Griot, who was suggested by composer Michael Giacchino, as they already had a long working relationship from working together on video games like The Lost World and Medal of Honor. Griot worked primarily with Brian Burke and experimented with different metals and other objects to find a familiar but also disorienting sound design that wouldn't include any organic or animalistic elements, without ever really knowing what the monster actually was supposed to be. Griot's wife, for example, suggested the sound from a chain of a roller coaster. Burke, on the other hand, noticed the sound of the taxi receipt printer when he was in New York for the upfronts and thought that it would be fitting. DeGorder eventually got a recording of such a printer, which then ended up being incorporated into the monster's tapestry of sound.
What was that?
That was weird, right?
Is that Vincent?
It's not Vincent.
Did anybody see that?
Yeah.
The difference between the original and the final cut is also quite recognizable during the appearance of the monster at the cockpit, with the monster sounding much more alien and elusive.
The hell was that? The hell was that?
While working on the sound and making all of those changes, they also had the chance to fix any mistakes they had made in the original cut. There was just one real continuity issue, albeit a small one that's hard to notice. Since all three flashbacks in the pilot show the same scene, just from a different point of view, everything should match. According to the script, one of the stewards was supposed to say, "Ladies and gentlemen, the pilot has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. Please return to your seats with your seatbelts fastened." In the original cut, the pilot was suddenly called Captain, and the turned on line changed into switched on, then turned on, and then back to switched on again.
Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has switched on the fasten seatbelt sign. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has switched on the fasten seatbelt sign.
Instead of fixing this announcement for the final cut, it actually became even more inconsistent. According to the first flashback, it's the pilot who has switched on the sign. According to the second flashback, it's suddenly the captain who has turned on the sign. And according to the third flashback, the sign was again switched on just by the captain, not the pilot.
Ladies and gentlemen, the pilot has switched on the fasten seatbelt sign. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has switched on the fasten seatbelt sign.
The last and biggest piece to complete the puzzle was the composition of the soundtrack to replace the temp score of the original cut with new and original music by composer Michael Giacchino. Much like Abrams, Giacchino already had the ambition to enter the film business from a young age. He made his own small films, learned about all the aspects of the craft, and only later specialized in writing music, after he originally wanted to work in animation. His professional career even began in the video game industry, where he worked for Disney Interactive on the game Donald Duck and Maui Mallard, only to eventually jump to DreamWorks Interactive after the fallout between Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg. To his delight, and thanks to the high standards of Steven Spielberg, who didn't want to use synthesized music for their own games, Giacchino was able to work with a real orchestra to record his compositions for games like The Lost World and Medal of Honor. It was that music that eventually put him on the radar of Abrams, who was looking for a composer for his new show, Alias. Both of them quickly became friends and were destined to be constant collaborators. When Lost was just about to come into existence, naturally it was only Giacchino who was eligible for this new project.
The first thing I wrote for Lost was the first scene, was when Jack's eye opens. It was really just unsettling for me because, plane crashes are never a good thing, and here you are trying to have fun writing music for something like this. I remember thinking it's just really exciting to be a part of something that was going to be different.
With Giacchino's background of working with an orchestra and Abrams' big name status, they were also fortunate enough to be able to do the same for Lost. Recording a live orchestra can often be taken for granted in the television business due to its higher costs. The recording for the first part of the pilot was done on August 24th, 2004, and for part 2 on September 7th, 2004, just 2 weeks before the official TV premiere.
Every single show on television is synthesized. When we first started talking about the music for Lost, we knew we wanted to make sure that we did it live.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're working on the first episode of a new series called Lost. And again, we are trying to put an orchestra on television.
Whenever you're ready.
Yeah.
As scary and uneasy as the show is, it's also a really emotional show. And, nothing can convey that kind of an emotion as well as live players sitting in a room playing music. So I wanted the audience to feel the same way that the characters were feeling. And to me, that was to kind of come up with some kind of strange ensemble of instruments and just use that on a constant basis to score the show. Cool. That's been a goal, too, on the show, is to kind of find different ways to use the instruments. To look at the harp and go, well, what else can we do with this thing that you normally wouldn't do with it? Whether you hit it with something or whether you just pluck it with your nail and use them in unexpected ways. While the strings can be used to be very emotional and all of that, we can also use them to just really scratch. And it gives this crazy, frightening sound. So those are great tools to have. What do we surround that with? And we thought, okay, how about just bizarre percussion, you know? And the first thought was like, okay, they're in a jungle, so jungle. But it was like, no, we don't want jungle percussion. We want stuff that's like bizarre. So what we did was we shipped home sections of the airplane.
While shooting, JJ had specifically said we should save some pieces of the plane and bring it back so Michael can use it for scoring. At the tail end of production, I kind of went through the wreckage and picked out some good pieces as far as wreckage goes. We shipped it up in a big crate, and when we got back to the scoring stage, Michael strung it up and used it for a lot of the percussion.
We used that on the show, and in the percussion booth, the guy plays the airplane pieces.
Abrams also gave Giacchino a lot of creative leeway, even apart from his use of the rather unconventional instruments. The confidence Abrams had showed in him was already evident from the fact they had only completed half a spotting session for the pilot to discuss where and what kind of music should be played. After that, Giacchino had almost complete creative control. Almost, because he had to hold back on one specific instrument, a limitation for which he later avenged himself with a gift to his friend.
We have trombones, of course, which are the big, have become kind of the joke on the show in a way, I guess. The act outs where you hear that kind of thing.
You know, I'm like, you have to stop doing that. And so as a joke, he's like, okay, well, just one per show.
Thanks, Michael.
You're welcome.
Michael does this. He gives me gifts, and I don't give him gifts.
It's been going 10 years. Has been doing.
Cannot
this.
believe you. Why would you do that?
10 years. I'm like that psycho girlfriend that just keeps waiting. No, he loves me. I swear to God, he loves me.
It's actually true. You gave me. Michael gave me a. Are we allowed to break the fourth wall? How does this work?
I think we. I guess.
Michael, when we were doing Lost, there was. You kept ending acts, and let's just be honest.
You loved it.
Every act.
Every act in the beginning.
In the beginning, with these trombones, we're like. This like trombone band thing, you know, and so every commercial was like, Tide is a fantastic detergent. You know, it was like, and I remember I was like, Michael, at some point, just like, you know, maybe one act out that's not like the trombone band. And a trombone arrived at my office that was engraved. So you've been giving me gifts for, you know, a long time. Thank you.
While the pilot was still being worked on in the background, work also had to be done in the writer's room, where they began mapping out the first few of the 11 episodes they were hired to produce, deciding what would happen in those episodes, whom the episodes would be about, and what stories they would tell in the flashbacks. The writing staff consisted of Lindelof himself, Javier Grillo-Marx-Watch, Paul Dini, Christian Taylor, and Jennifer Johnson from the original Think Tank, and the newly joined writers Lynn E. Litt, Leonard Dick, Drew Goddard, and David Fury. Lindelof, however, also had other duties as showrunner besides just writing new scripts. One important responsibility was to promote the show to the press and their target audience. This part of the job started July 13th when he, along with Abrams and the cast, had to face a number of members of the Television Critics Association to answer questions and create some buzz to help the show get off to a good start. After all, quality alone was no guarantee for success. Stephen McPherson, though, who had just become the head of the network a couple weeks prior, was notably absent, dodging some potentially awkward questions concerning the situation around his sudden promotion and the departure of Lloyd Braun and Susan Lyne. He, however, had a good excuse as he was spending his time with his wife Jennifer on their long-planned honeymoon in Paris. Nevertheless, he addressed some concerns regarding ABC via satellite, saying they might have to be patient with their shows to become successful, and also praised Abrams for bringing an interesting look to what otherwise could be just another island show. The other questions from the press were primarily directed at Abrams, who of course acted as the face for the series due to his well-known name and status as producer and director co-writer of the pilot. He explained that you have to try to make the audience care about the characters, and that this is the reason why audiences would be able to get into Lost despite its weird premise. This characters first mantra would also apply to the monster, meaning that the monster shouldn't become the focus of the show and overshadow the characters. Another question pertained to the content of the show itself, which could be unsuitable for young viewers and would need to comply with the strict rules of the FCC. According to Abrams, the higher-ups at ABC themselves hadn't made any demands to make cuts yet. Some of the reporters, like Juliana DePonde, were already raving about Abrams and Lindelof, only to confess that she hadn't even seen the pilot yet.
So, Lost, starting up, this is one of the most anticipated shows. Everyone's very excited to see this.
Including us.
Including you, I'm sure. And I gotta say, Damon Lindelof, by the way, is amazing. And J.J. Abrams, of course.
JJ and Damon and Berkey and Sarah Kaplan, they did an amazing job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I can't wait. Everyone's talking about it.
You haven't seen it?
What? I have not, actually. I gotta see it, though. I know. I'm sorry. You know what? I was
Thinking, no, I only say that
I'm like, I was
I only say that because literally, I mean, I think the show speaks for itself so well that
yeah,
it does.
I know we got to tease the audience.
The flurry of activity, stress, and excitement from the past few months also seemed to overwhelm Evangeline Lilly, who couldn't remember when they shot the pilot.
Now, you guys shot the pilot. When did you shoot the pilot?
March and April?
May, June? No, it was later than that. It was May and June. Was it
May
not?
and June.
We shot it for 5 weeks. I remember
March and
that.
March and April? And it was for 5 weeks?
Yeah.
Yes, 6 weeks actually.
Yeah.
We shot a week here as well.
Right.
Oh, really?
I mean, yeah, we did.
And most of the time was in Oahu?
Yes. North
Where
Shore
you
of
guys
Oahu.
are going to be shooting the show.
That's right.
The tone in the following articles from exhausted critics who were plagued by countless bad pilots was pretty consistent. Pigs Can Fly and ABC had the best programming to offer after many, many years of not competing well. During those days, Lost found its first major advocate in the journalist, columnist, and blogger Kristen Veach from the E! Entertainment Television Network. In a time before Twitter or other forms of social media, she hyped up and promoted Lost at every opportunity on her blog and in direct chat sessions with her readers. For example, on June 7, 2004, she stated that the Lost pilot felt like she was watching the best movie of the year. In the coming weeks, she found even clearer words to persuade her fans to tune in for the premiere, telling them that they should watch Lost or die. Meanwhile, the Lost crew had their next stop at the San Diego Comic-Con on July 24th, where a general audience had the opportunity to take an extended look at Lost when they screened the first 40 minutes of the pilot to the people that could attend the event. The crowd was so large they even had to switch the location from room 6C, D, E, and F to ballroom 20 to make room for 4,800 instead of the initially expected 3,000 fans. After the screening, the cast and crew held a Q&A panel to answer the many questions from the fans. The crew was represented by Damon Lindelof, Paul Dini, David Fury, and Brian Burke. The cast members were the three main characters in the pilot: Matthew Fox, Evangeline Lilly, and Dominic Monaghan. Monaghan, of course, was the center of attention from a large part of the female audience due to his Lord of the Rings fame.
Thanks for watching. Obviously, there's a lot more to come, but to help tell you a little bit about that, I'd like to bring out some of the writers and cast members of the cast. Matthew Fox. Evangeline Lilly. Dominic Monaghan.
The show, is it going to go more sci-fi or more character development? Is this going to be Survivor with Raptors or what?
First off, I want to go on record as saying there are no dinosaurs on the island.
Their day concluded with a long autograph session, which gave the fans another chance to briefly chat with the Lost team. A small but noteworthy detail could be found on the posters that were on display at the convention center, as they revealed the flight number to be 280. This was, however, most likely a decision of the marketing department, who simply chose a random number, as it was never mentioned in the pilot or even the scripts. The next opportunity to see the pilot with the cast and crew before the TV premiere arose just a few weeks later on August 28th at the Queen's Surf Beach on Oahu as part of the regularly held Sunset on the Beach event, where the complete, albeit not yet finished, movie was shown at the open-air screening as a way to thank the local community for their support. According to the police, more than 10,000 people attended the event, far more than the usual 5,000 to 7,500. Some viewers even watched the pilot from behind the screen so as not to miss out on the opportunity. The actors were diligently handing out autographs and again answering the many questions from the press. Among them, of course, Kristen Veach for E! News.
Yes, welcome to my latest obsession. I went all the way to the show's home base, Hawaii, to get the scoop on Lost.
While she did try to elicit some answers from the cast,
Just if you could just tell us what the monster is. Just real quick.
Tell you if you paid me.
Really?
I don't even know.
she also talked to newcomer Evangeline Lilly about her previous experiences, such as the screening at Comic-Con.
So this is pretty amazing for premiere. You guys are on the beach in Hawaii, huge screen, all the locals are here.
Oh, there's nothing about this show that is done half-assed. I mean, there's just no halfway, there's no in-between. We go all out, and it's so exciting because this gives us a sense of hype, and this gives us a chance to see how people react to it. And when we were in San Diego, myself, Matthew Fox, and Dominic Monaghan went to Comic Conference, and we were in a room with 4,000 people where they showed the pilot, and listening to people laugh and gasp and like cheer and everything. I was literally on the edge of my seat watching something I'd seen 6 times that I'd like spent 6 weeks filming, and I was like, oh, it's gonna happen next. I'm just so excited. Watching other people get into it. That's why we make it. We make it to entertain people. We make it to have people get into it.
I love it, and I'm so excited to see more of it and watch it again tonight. So
I'm excited to watch it again. I've seen it like 10 times. Yeah.
Finally, somebody who's seen it more than I have.
Yeah.
Yay! I don't feel like such a geek.
No, you're great.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
The final preview screenings happened on September 11th and 12th, just a few days ahead of the TV premiere at the Disney California Adventure Park as part of the ABC Primetime Preview Weekend. This time, only Matthew Fox, Evangeline Lilly, Dominic Monaghan, and Harold Perrineau were there to represent the show and once again give interviews to the press. Of course, those screenings alone are not enough to reach the masses that ABC would need for the show to become a viable hit. In the spirit of Lloyd Braun, who wanted Lost to make noise and be so big that it could hardly be avoided, the marketing team went all out and tried to market the show in a variety of ways. The traditional approach had already begun on May 23rd during the Season 3 finale of Alias, when Lost was announced with a short trailer as the new show from J.J. Abrams.
From J.J. Abrams, the creator of Alias. They survived the worst. Or did they? Lost, ABC this fall. Where are we?
Later trailers, for example, highlighted the casting of Dominic Monaghan, using his popularity from the Lord of the Rings trilogy and proclaiming that he would go from Middle-earth to the middle of nowhere.
Earth to the middle of nowhere. The Lord of the Rings, Dominic Monaghan. Guys, where are we? In the premiere of Lost. Wednesday at 8, 7 Central, only on ABC.
The less traditional approach to the marketing was spearheaded by ABC's Mike Benson in cooperation with the advertising agency OMD. Their strategy relied on what was called SOS media that used people's urge to help others in distress. This effort consisted of 3 parts, with the first one being the missing persons flyers that were already used at Comic-Con, but now with the updated flight number 815. They were supposed to provoke curiosity by withholding information and not giving any indication that they were promotional material for a TV show. As a result, more than 800,000 users visited IamLost.com. The second part consisted of a 3-week-long radio campaign, for which they aired 15-second-long distress calls on 5 of the country's largest radio stations, with the normal radio program resuming afterwards as if nothing had happened. These messages changed each week, revealing more details like the premiere date of the pilot. As a result, concerned citizens reached out to the respective radio stations and even to the Coast Guard. This radio campaign alone cost more than $8 million, technically pushing the overall budget for the pilot to over $20 million. The third and final part of the marketing campaign used the classic idea of a message in a bottle. For this, they hid 1,000 bottles on several U.S. beaches on Labor Day weekend in early September. Each bottle contained a letter with a message instructing the reader to watch ABC on September 22nd at 8 p.m. However, ABC reportedly had to pay some fines for littering, as not all bottles were immediately found. Nevertheless, the trouble was worthwhile for everyone involved, as they, according to Mike Benson, got more publicity for their campaign than they could have ever imagined. As if that were not enough, the head of LostTV.com decided to launch his own Save Lost campaign to raise interest in the show, especially for international viewers, in the hope that many foreign networks would license the rights to the show for broadcasting to further secure the future of Lost. The fear of losing Lost was not without reason, due to the poor ratings in recent years, which led ABC to sometimes jokingly being described as an acronym for Already Been Cancelled, or Almost Broadcasting Company. This effort even got some media attention when Kevin Williamson of the Calgary Sun reported on it on August 27, 2004, and used it as an opportunity to talk about the dire state of network television, in which quality would be a lost cause due to the popularity of disposable, cheap, and quickly produced reality TV formats. While shows like Big Brother and The Amazing Race would thrive and survive, others like Wonder Falls and The Tick, beloved by critics, would be canceled after just a few episodes. In a lengthy Q&A with Ain't It Cool News, Lindelof was also asked about the Save Lost campaign and responded a bit evasively by asking if there were others doing the same to kill shows, because he would support the cancellation of Seventh Heaven. With the actual production and the marketing being taken care of and the pilot approaching its final destination, there was still one more issue to be resolved, as it was yet to be determined who actually deserved the credit for creating the pilot episode and the show. That determination process is handled by the Writers Guild of America and can be very complicated, as they distinguish between credits like created by, developed by, story by, written by, and teleplay by, for which specific criteria have to be fulfilled. That process began by May 14th when representatives of ABC and Touchstone Television sent a notice of tentative writing credit and the final shooting script of the pilot to the WGA and all participating writers, as they are obligated to do by Guild rules. ABC and Touchstone claimed that Lost was created by Abrams and Lindelof, and that they deserved sole credit for the pilot, as indicated in the original cut that stated that the pilot was written by Abrams and Lindelof, meaning that they came up with the story and also wrote the script, while Jeffrey Lieber's name was nowhere to be found. However, Lieber protested after feeling wronged by alleged false promises and a disappointing conclusion of his own involvement with the show. He compared the work of Abrams and Lindelof with his own and wrote a 10-page document for the WGA with his findings for arbitration.
It's funny, there are lots of like threads between what I wrote, what was in the original script that JJ and Damon did that never made it to film, but there was, you know, the big moment in both my script and their script that never made it was this character who was the rock, right? The person you knew would help you survive. In my character, it was this former Army or Navy guy, you know, retired, who was their leader and then died in the middle of the script, fell off a cliff. I had originally had him die in a shark attack, and they were like, no, that's too out there.
No sharks.
No sharks, right. And I know that in Damon and JD's first script, what's his face? The lead. Jack died in the middle of the pilot as well. So it was an interesting parallel that there were a bunch of instincts that sort of held through to both of them. And I'm sure had we cast it, my version, that you'd have gotten this great actor for the part of the retired Army guy, and then we were like, all right, you can't kill him off. So, and the lovely thing is that one of the great things the Guild does is they sort of take over the process, which is all I ever had to do on that process was to sort of stand up and say, hey, I'd like to arbitrate. Actually, I didn't even have to say that. They when they say three names on the script, then the arbitration is natural. The only thing I had to do was basically write a statement and so on and so forth, and the guild takes the rest of it. So what they do is they look at, are the characters similar? Is the dialogue similar? Is the setup is really the big one? Is the structural conceit similar? And then they make a determination as to who gets credit and how it all falls out.
By August 3rd, 3 anonymous members of the Guild eventually reached the conclusion that Lieber deserved a story by credit for the pilot, which he had to share with Abrams and Lindelof, while Abrams and Lindelof also got the teleplay by credit for turning the story into the script. According to the MBA, their minimum basic compensation for the story was $15,445, while Abrams and Lindelof got at least $27,463 for writing the script. Furthermore, the WGA decided by September 1, 2004, that Lieber would have to be credited in every subsequent episode as a co-creator of the show, with 60% of the credits belonging to him, while Abrams and Lindelof had to share the other 40%. This meant that Lieber would be compensated accordingly for every episode, adding up to a 6-figure amount that he would receive each year, even though he was no longer involved with the show. As he later explained in an interview with Chicago Magazine, this result was somewhat uncomfortable for him, and he joked that this money would be used to pay for his therapy sessions. This might seem excessive and unfair towards Abrams and Lindelof, considering the fact that Lieber didn't come up with the concept for the show, but instead Lloyd Braun had, and even that original concept was not particularly original in the first place. However, Braun himself was not eligible for credit, as WGA rules require for that person to have written at least a treatment. It was thus inevitable that the original work from Lieber and the new approach by Abrams and Lindelof would resemble each other, as the setting and the basic premise of the story was predefined. That applies to the characters as well, when they have to fill certain roles to establish character dynamics for relationships and conflicts. As Lindelof explained, there were some similarities in terms of archetypes between the Lieber script and their version. For example, the existence of a fugitive on the plane and a nurse who became Jack. Having a person with medical experience among the survivors is, however, nothing that could be considered exceptional or original. The character Nell Woods from Lieber's Nowhere was just in the first year of training, while Jack Shephard from Lost had many years of experience as a spinal surgeon. Besides that, they don't share too many attributes. The similarities are therefore mostly superficial, which can hardly be avoided when creating a diverse group of people with different backgrounds. In fact, the German TV series Verschollen, which was developed at the same time as Lieber's Nowhere, and which would premiere just a few days before Lost, bears many commonalities to Lieber's script, like a family, a person with medical experience, in this case a veterinarian, and a pregnant woman who kept the pregnancy a secret, even down to the fact that Nowhere and Verschollen focused on the conflict between two brothers. The WGA, therefore, seemingly ignored that Abrams and Lindelof essentially started from scratch and overhauled the whole concept by deviating from the pure survival aspect, making the island itself its own character with a mystical background and giving the show a completely different narrative structure with flashbacks to explore the characters' backgrounds, while Lieber's Nowhere would have been an absolutely straightforward story on a regular island, exactly what he was hired for and what he was instructed to write. All of this, however, should not diminish his contributions and ideas. While the Lost that Abrams and Lindelof produced might have been almost the same even if Lieber's script had never existed, it can't be denied that it started out as a rewrite of Nowhere, as several elements of Lost can clearly be traced back to Lieber's early work. One example would be the character Piper Brightman, who is described as the stereotypical blonde rich girl who was on vacation with her mother and sister. She ended up in the front section of the plane due to a fight with her mother, and her mother and sister remained in the tail section of the plane. She suspected that her family had died in the crash, and began suffering from survivor's guilt. This scenario is very similar to the experience of Shannon in the Lost pilot, who also struggles with survivor's guilt after realizing that she likely would have died in the crash if she hadn't changed seats from first class. The plane breaking apart was also the basis for another idea, as Lieber had the long-term goal to have the newlyweds Paul and Sarah Hill be separated by the crash and then later reunited. Abrams and Lindelof had considered using this plotline for Kate and her husband Rob, which could have turned into a love triangle. But while Kate's backstory was rewritten for her to be a criminal on the run, the basic idea was still used and given to Rose and her husband Bernard, who were also just returning from spending their honeymoon in Australia. Another direct example of Lieber's influence on the story was the reason why Truman Graham and his half-brother Ross Porter were in Australia. According to Lieber's outline, they were in Australia to recover the remains of their father. While that reason was only teased as a part of Jack's background story in the series format document, it was later revealed in the episode White Rabbit that he was also in Sydney to return his father's body to the United States. White Rabbit was also the episode that features a significant moment for Jack and the show in general due to a speech that Jack gives and a very special line of dialogue. This originated back in Lieber's Nowhere script as well. While the idea of giving a leader speech to resolve some kind of conflict is almost to be expected as a story beat, the evolution of the wording from iteration to iteration is unmistakable. In his outline from September 2003, Lieber wrote the line, "But we must never lose hope, and we can't fight amongst ourselves. We stick together and we survive. We split apart and we perish." The wording later changed into, "It's as simple as this. Together we survive, apart we don't." But the scene was kept and remained a part of his final script. When Abrams and Lindelof started over, they originally had Kate step up as the new leader after Jack's unexpected death, with her giving the big speech to unite the rest of the survivors. Lieber's writing was copied almost word for word. It's quite simple, really. Survive together or die apart. However, due to all the rewrites and changes along the way, like Jack emerging as the leader of the survivors, the speech didn't end up in the pilot itself. It eventually made its way onto the screen in White Rabbit.
But if we can't live together, we're gonna die alone.
The evolution from "we stick together and we survive, we split apart and we perish," to "if we can't live together, we're gonna die alone," is very evident and can't be disputed. The WGA's decision to credit Lieber as one of the show's co-creators was not without reason, even if the amount of his compensation remains debatable. What is rather odd is that Lieber's name is withheld in the official Genesis of Lost featurette. Instead of his Nowhere script, only a fake front page of a script with the made-up title The Circle and no named writer is pictured, which is absurd considering the fact that his name is shown in the credits at the beginning of every episode. With that issue resolved, Lost was finally ready to premiere on television.